Moving to another issue, crossbench MPs from the House of Representatives and Senate have written to the Defence Minister Richard Marles today calling for an urgent parliamentary inquiry into AUKUS. Now, the move follows the US's snap review into the Defence Pact announced yesterday. I want to bring in independent MP Monique Ryan, who is the MP for Kooyong. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Patricia. Nice to be with you.
Quickly, if we can, I mean, this is quite a dangerous situation unfolding in the Middle East. How concerned are you that we are on the cusp of a broader regional conflict?
Look, I think everyone's really concerned about the potential for Iran's actions in the last 24 hours to further destabilise what is already a really volatile region and for potential for further escalation of the situation in the Middle East.
Now, the Prime Minister, of course, has begun his trip and he will end up at the G7, where he's been trying to get a meeting with Donald Trump. It seems that that's not secure, and, of course, now the US will be very much focused on the Middle East, as you'd expect. Is your call for a review into AUKUS another way of saying you want the government to ditch AUKUS? Because clearly AUKUS would have been on the agenda there.
Not at all, Patricia. I think all Australians are really concerned about our defence capacity at what is, let's face it, a time of great geopolitical instability. And we've had real concerns about our relationships with many of our international partners in recent years. What we want, what independents have been asking for, and what many of our constituents have been asking us to secure, is greater transparency about the government's arrangements over AUKUS with the US and the UK, and some greater surety about the deliverability of the things that we've committed to. This is our biggest ever commitment in terms of defence spending. We're committed to spending $386 billion at least on a single program. What we want to know is that it's going to be delivered on time, that we're going to see the subs that we've asked for, and that the government has a backup plan if it happens that the US decides that they don't want to go ahead with that. What we've seen in the last couple of months is both the UK and the US are partners in this big plan, saying that they want to undertake an independent review of the AUKUS strategic plan. What we're asking is for our government to do the same thing. At no point since Scott Morrison committed to this plan pretty hastily in 2021 have we ever had any opportunity for public consultation or parliamentary debate about our biggest ever defence commitment.
It's interesting you make that point, because the government's argument is that, in fact, when it was elected, there was a big defence review, and that was kind of really centred very much on AUKUS as well. Do you think that was not enough in terms of scrutiny on AUKUS?
The Defence Strategic Review that the government's pointing to was not specifically aimed at AUKUS, and AUKUS was a part of it, only a relatively small part of it. What we lack is any capacity to understand what our backup options are if AUKUS does fall over, if the US, which is, let's face it, been increasingly isolationist in the last 6 months under Donald Trump, decides that it's not in their best interest, which they have every right to decide that. We need to understand what our priorities are and our options are in that instance.
Now, of course, the US review, many people in the government are arguing, is just pretty standard. Do you accept that it's just standard and that there's no reason to see it as some sort of crisis?
I think a review of a major commitment like this should be standard. It should be something that we undertake at reasonable and set intervals with transparency and clarity around it.
No, but I mean the US reviewing AUKUS.
Yeah, sure.
Is
so
that
the US review it. It might well be standard for them. Who knows? But why wouldn't we be undertaking the same sort of thing about a commitment that's so significant for our country? If people are saying, oh, no, that's just something that they would do routinely, I would argue we should do that sort of thing routinely as well for a commitment as big and significant as this.
And that's obviously not being committed to by the government. How can you force their hand? I mean, they have a thumping majority in the parliament. When the parliament does return a little later this year, what will your strategy be?
Well, governments, have power, but oppositions have pressure, Patricia. And I've heard innumerable times in the last 3 or 4 months from constituents on the hustings during the recent electoral campaign, what are you doing about AUKUS? I haven't heard from a single person that they're entirely happy with the situation. I think the government's going to continue to hear from crossbenchers, but I would hope also from members of the government and from the opposition about their constituents' concerns about that, and they will respond to the reasonable concerns of so many Australians about this massive commitment from the government.
Now, in a moment, I'm going to be speaking, spoke to him a little earlier, but the Health Minister, Mark Butler. Of course, you're a former doctor, and today the health ministers have all met, and it seems that IVF and artificial, and also I think it's called artificial. There's another artificial name. Thank you. The other one are all under review. Is that rapid review the right decision? Because clearly there's a lack of trust in, clearly Monash IVF after their bungles, but perhaps the broader system.
Yeah, look, so, I mean, there's two recent incidents involving Monash IVF are incredibly unfortunate. And the decision for families to engage in IVF and assisted reproductive technologies is a big one. You know, it's a big economic decision for those families, but also an emotional commitment that they make. And to know that these sorts of issues have happened with Monash IVF is very distressing for people who are working in that space. But it does point to the fact that much of the healthcare in this country is a bit fragmented. If we look at health regulation, not only just of IVF, but other areas of our health system as well, too much of it is undertaken at a state or territory basis and not with national regulation or supervision. Too much of it is undertaken, as is the case with IVF, by the societies or professional groups that are responsible for that area of care. So, sure, we can undertake a rapid review of what's happened in this particular instance, but I would hope that this whole situation with IVF will push Mark Butler to look at health regulation across the country and how we can ensure that people, no matter where they live around the country or what sort of healthcare they're receiving, can be sure that we're regulating and keeping an eye on the quality of that service as best as possible.
Monique, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Patricia. Thank you.